Tattoo artists. What was your biggest oh crap moment while tattooing? Story 1. Not a tattoo artist myself, but this story still haunts me. My childhood best friend was a tattoo artist. After years of hard work, he finally saved up enough to open his own shop somewhere in mainland Europe. It was a big deal. He'd uprooted everything, put his life savings into this dream, and was building something he was genuinely proud of. A few years back, I went to visit him. One evening, as the shop was winding down for the day, he told me he was going to step out to grab some food and a couple of beers. He asked me to just watch the shop while he was gone. It was no big deal. Well, a group of 4 girls passed by the shop, clearly a little tipsy, and peeked inside. They started chatting with me. Nothing wild, just friendly conversation at first. Then one of them asked if I was the tattoo artist. I was just a guest. Not an artist at all, but in the moment I made a really dumb decision. I figured, if I kept them around until my buddy got back, maybe we could all hang out or something. One thing led to another, and I said, "Sure, what do you want done?" They laughed and said they wanted small matching butterfly tattoos. At that point, I let my judgment slip entirely. I was caught up in the attention and the moment, and I foolishly decided to try tattooing them myself. I pulled out a machine, lined them up, and started working. It wasn't professional, and it certainly wasn't safe, but I didn't think about that at the time. We were laughing and joking. Honestly, it felt like harmless fun. That is, until I was working on the last girl, and my friend walked back into the shop. He was horrified when he saw what was happening in his absence. The moment I heard his voice, I panicked and turned around too quickly, still holding the tattoo machine. I ended up accidentally dragging the needle across this girl's cheek. She started screaming. The mood flipped instantly. It was total chaos. The girls left in a frenzy, trying to calm the one who got hurt, and my friend just stood there, probably realizing what had just happened in his shop while he stepped out for 15 minutes. Fast forward a few weeks, and I was back home, and he messaged me saying things had taken a really bad turn. The girls turned out to be underage. They claimed that he was the one who tattooed them, gave them alcohol, and made inappropriate advances. In reality, it was all on me, but I wasn't there to explain or clear his name. He was facing serious charges, everything one could think of: malpractice, negligence, even criminal accusations. But he didn't throw me under the bus. Instead, he took the full weight of the fallout. I tried reaching out after that, but he went completely dark. No responses to texts or calls. His social media disappeared. I got worried and eventually decided to fly back to see him in person. I met his girlfriend and finally learned the full extent of what happened. He had lost everything: his business, his reputation, even his relationship. He was painted as someone he wasn't, all because I made a stupid, reckless decision and wasn't there to take responsibility. He couldn't prove otherwise, and he didn't fight back with the truth. He took his life shortly after. I've lived with the guilt of that every day since. I lost my best friend, the person who'd been there since we were kids, because I made a careless, impulsive choice and didn't think about the consequences. He protected me even when he shouldn't have had to. It changed me forever. I'll never be able to make it right, but I tell this story not to look for sympathy, only to say that mistakes made in a moment can destroy someone else's whole world. Please, if you ever find yourself in a situation where your choices can affect someone else's livelihood, career, or life, think twice, then think again. I'm literally crying while writing this. I miss him every day. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I'm an artist, and while I've had plenty of awkward moments in the chair, one still stands out as hilariously uncomfortable. I was working on a tattoo on a client's butt cheek, and things were going smoothly. We were having a light conversation, joking around, laughing, and it was a good vibe. But then mid-laugh, she let a loud one rip. The second it happened, she started panicking and got embarrassed. She froze up instantly. Our conversation, which had been rolling along casually, completely died on the spot. I constrained my laughter, pretended like I hadn't heard anything, and just focused on my work. A few seconds later, she quietly put in her headphones, and that was that. Total silence for the rest of the session. Then, a couple of weeks later, I started a big thigh piece on a client. We took a short break during the session, and if you've ever had a tattoo, You know how much more it hurts when the needle goes back in after a pause. Well, the moment I started back up, the pain must have caught her completely off guard. She let one fly and had her moment of embarrassment. She immediately turned red and said something like, "I'm so sorry, that was out of fear." I just reassured her that it happens and kept going like nothing happened. Story 3. So, I had just finished prepping all my equipment. The machines were ready, the station was clean, and everything was set to go. As I turned around to tell my client we were about to begin, I saw him stroking himself, completely stunned. I shouted at him, "What the heck are you doing?" Because honestly, what else can you say in that situation? The guy just looked at me like I was the weird one and said, "What?" I needed to release some pressure before getting tattooed. I stood there in disbelief for a second, then just shook my head and pointed toward the door. No yelling, no debate, just out. Story 4. Not a tattoo artist, but I was on the receiving end. To be fair, I was young, high, and had been drinking. Not my proudest combo. My older friend had recently started seeing this guy who had just gotten out of prison. He claimed to do tattoos freehand and had apparently done a bunch while locked up. I figured, why not? Free art, right? I picked out a lily design from a tattoo magazine, something simple and pretty. He got started right there and seemed to be moving along okay. About 3/4 of the way through, he suddenly pauses, leans back, and goes, "Crap, I think I just drew a dong on your leg." I stared down, and sure enough, the part of the flower that was supposed to be the stamen looked exactly like a dong, a cartoon one. At this point, I'm equal parts horrified and trying not to laugh. He insists he can fix it. I should have known better. His idea of a fix was basically drawing something over it that ended up looking like it was wearing a sheath. I don't know what he was thinking, but it somehow made it worse. I avoided shorts for a while after that. Eventually, a couple of years later, I had it professionally covered up. The new artist took one look and just blinked like, what was this supposed to be? Also, don't get tattooed by someone's new boyfriend who's using a prison-style machine in a living room while you're tipsy and high, and maybe double-check the flower anatomy next time. Story 5. I've been tattooing for about 25 years now. Typos, birthday numbers getting mixed up, names spelled wrong. It happens more often than you'd think. Sometimes the client doesn't even notice until it's too late. Honestly, it's not always just the artist's fault. The error can slip by during the design phase, the stencil process, and even right before the needle hits skin. The key is knowing how to fix it when it happens. Over the years, I've seen and heard of some wild ones. Heck, I've had clients give me the wrong spelling of their own kid's name. One guy I worked with tattooed a Bible verse that ended one line with the N. The next line started with the again, not how it was supposed to read. One day, an older gentleman who had to be in his late 60s walked into my studio and asked for a portrait of his wife. I figured he wanted something classic, maybe her name underneath or a meaningful quote. But then he asked if I could add something to it. I said sure, expecting something sentimental. "Can you make it look like she's being mounted by a deer?" he says. I genuinely thought I misheard him, but he was dead serious. Then he started telling me a story. Apparently, decades ago, he and his wife were camping with some friends. One morning, his wife went into the woods to relieve herself, and out of nowhere, a male deer showed up and startled her while she was, well, mid-squat. According to him, the deer got a little too close. He heard the commotion, rushed out of the tent, and saw the whole thing. And then he says, "All I could do was take it down." That part left me confused. The deer or the situation? At first I assumed it was a tall tale, the kind people love to spin for a laugh. But he came back for his appointment and brought his wife and the same group of friends. Every single one of them told the story the exact same way. They were laughing, retelling it like it was some legendary family moment. So I went ahead with the tattoo. I ended up designing it in a vintage, pin-up art style. The wife was drawn with a surprised expression, peeking out of some tall grass, and a deer in the background standing on its hind legs with its hooves on her shoulders. I kept it cheeky, but not explicit, just enough to get the point across without going overboard. Right before I started, though, the old guy asked me one last thing. "Can you make it look like you know something's really happening?" I told him that was a no-go for me, but he loved the rest of it. The wife thought it was hilarious. Their friends were howling with laughter. I snapped one photo of it and posted it to my website for maybe a week before I decided it was probably better to take it down. A friend later told me it ended up on one of those weird tattoo fail websites, so it's probably still floating around the internet somewhere. Story 6. I've been a professional tattoo artist for close to 17 years now, and I've seen a lot, but nothing quite shook me like what happened last winter. I was working on a young woman's calf. Just a small, simple piece, nothing intense. Usually, if someone's going to pass out, you can tell it's coming. There's a sort of glazed-over, cross-eyed look. Their skin gets clammy and pale. They start talking nonsense or slurring their words. When you know the signs, you can take precautions, stop the session, get them something sugary, and help them lie down safely. But this time, there were no signs at all. I was focused on her leg, head down, fully absorbed in the work. Suddenly, I just heard this awful, loud thunk, like someone dropped a watermelon onto the tile. I look up and see that she is completely slumped forward, unconscious, and hit the floor face first. Immediate panic. I rush over to check on her, and she's totally unresponsive. No movement, no reply. I shout to her friend, "What's her name?" She says, "Tasha." I'm shaking her gently, calling out, "Tasha, Tasha, can you hear me?" But there's nothing. And then I see a massive pool of dark red blood spreading out from under her head. It was everywhere. I've been through some stressful moments, but in that instant, my brain just froze. I thought, this is it. I'm done. I imagined the headlines. Bearded, heavily tattooed artist, unconscious client, blood everywhere. I honestly thought I was going to jail. I snapped back into action and told her friend to call 911 immediately, giving her the address. I was doing everything I could to stay calm and follow my training. That's when Tasha began to regain consciousness, making strange, groggy noises, but she was alive and semi-alert. I reassured her gently, kept her on the ground so she wouldn't injure herself more, and slowly started checking her condition. Turned her so the blood wouldn't run into her eyes or mouth. I cleaned her up just enough to assess the wound. She was dazed, but consistent, with no signs of a concussion other than the cut on her head. Within minutes, the place was full of emergency responders, 2 fire trucks, an ambulance, and 7 EMTs. They got her stabilized and transported her to the hospital, where she ended up needing 10 stitches to close the gash on her forehead. Thankfully, all licensed tattoo artists in my state are required to keep their CPR and first aid certifications up to date, and in moments like that, you realize why it matters so much. This kind of incident could have ended very differently if she'd been at an unlicensed setup or house party, surrounded by people afraid to call for help. The best part is, Tasha came back 2 weeks later to get her tattoo finished. She handled it like a champ that time. No fainting, no issues. We both laughed about it, and she left completely happy with her ink. I do actually have a photo of the massive puddle of blood on my shop floor. It took an entire roll of paper towels and a ton of disinfectant to clean up, but I'll never post that picture online, out of respect for Tasha, and because I try to keep things professional. Still, if Tasha ever stumbles across this post, hey, feel free to show them what you survived. Story 7. I've done a lot of strange and uncomfortable tattoos in my time, some wild placements and some even wilder requests, but this particular moment stands out as one of the worst client experiences I've ever had. It was a typical day, and a woman came in asking for a butterfly tattoo on her ankle. Nothing out of the ordinary. I get so many butterfly requests that I can almost draw them in my sleep. She liked the design I sketched out, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. That was until she took off her boot. Now, I've worn combat boots since I was a teenager. I know what foot sweat smells like, but nothing could have prepared me for this. The second she pulled her foot out, I thought I would faint. The smell was overpowering, easily the worst thing I've ever smelled in a professional setting. I tried to stay composed, but it was rough. Then she rolled down her stockings, and things somehow got worse. Her toenails were long, discolored, and oddly shaped. There was a visible buildup, black stuff between her toes. I already have a personal discomfort with feet, but this was on another level. Still, I'm a professional. I put on my gloves and started drawing the stencil on her ankle, but as I leaned in, I actually gagged. Couldn't help it. She immediately yelled at me for being rude. I apologized, saying I wasn't feeling well, blamed something I ate, and grabbed a mask to help get through the rest of it. By the time I finished sketching it out, she was still irritated and loudly announcing that I wouldn't be getting a tip. Whatever, at that point I just wanted to get the tattoo done and move on with my day. But as soon as I began to ink, she jerked her leg away, really suddenly. Thankfully I hadn't started with any lines yet, so there was no permanent damage, but she started bleeding pretty badly. Blood was all over the chair and the stool. I grabbed a gauze and tried to keep things calm, but she was yelling again, this time demanding to speak to the manager. So I went and got him. He stepped in, handled her while I cleaned up, and eventually finished the tattoo himself. As far as I know, it came out okay, but she was still upset, saying I should be fired, threatening to post about me online. My boss, who is generally very level-headed, just kind of waved her off. Later, he told me her feet were so bad that he almost got kicked trying to hold them still. It was just a terrible experience all around. Honestly, I've tattooed dongs over whiners, but nothing has stuck with me quite like that ankle butterfly and the smell that came with it. Still, I put on my gloves and showed up to work the next day. Story 8. So, my wife and I are part of an S&M and swap club. Let's just say we all met through some non-traditional means, but over time we started bonding outside of that context. Eventually, we began having more laid-back vanilla hangouts at bars and restaurants, just a bunch of friends relaxing, chatting, and having a good time. One night, over a few drinks, I pulled out my phone and started sketching a little design that, in my mind, represented our group. It was abstract, kind of cool-looking, and had layers of meaning, some obvious, some only those in the know would get. I jokingly called it our clan tattoo. Everyone laughed, thought it looked awesome, but no one seriously talked about getting it done. Fast forward a few months, and we're hosting one of the vanilla get-togethers at our house. This time, my stepkids were there since it was a family setting and not one of our more private gatherings. While we were hanging out, my stepdaughter casually mentioned that she knew a tattoo artist who did house calls and would offer a steep discount if enough people were interested. She'd already seen his work and vouched for him, and the rest of the group was curious. I remembered the old clan design and brought it up again just for fun. This time, people were actually into the idea. The artist shows up and sets up shop in the living room. He seemed professional, brought a full setup, portfolio, equipment, the whole deal, even showed us photos of some impressive work. I was still a bit skeptical, especially because the price he quoted seemed unusually low. He explained that he was doing it off the books, not paying shop fees or taxes, and with 8 or so people lined up, he could afford to keep it cheap. My stepdaughter wanted a Leo zodiac tattoo, and after seeing how clean and detailed it came out, I started feeling a lot more confident, so I offered to pay for anyone who wanted to get the clan design I'd made. I went first. It looked great. My wife followed, then 2 other couples joined in, everyone placing the tattoo in different spots. We were all happy with the results. Got the ointment, wrapped them up, and went outside to grab a smoke. When I came back inside, my stepson walked up to me beaming, saying, "Check it out. I got that cool symbol you designed. The guy did it for free." I barely had time to react before I saw my stepdaughter on the table getting the same design inked on her. They had no idea what the tattoo actually represented, what it really meant. It was never supposed to be anything more than a private in-joke among the swap club adults. The fact that my stepkids now had it permanently on their bodies, yeah, that was a full-body oh no moment. I didn't even know how to explain it without unraveling a whole mess of things. Still don't really. To this day, every time I see those tattoos on them, I have this gnawing feeling in my stomach. Story 9. Tattoo artist here. I've had my fair share of oh crap moments, but a few stand out in particular, and each for completely different reasons. The first one happened a couple of years ago. I was tattooing a client, while our shop apprentice was working on someone else across the room. Everything seemed normal, until my client's husband, who was standing next to me, leaned in and quietly said, "Hey, I think your friend might need some help." I looked up and saw that the apprentice's client had completely passed out in the chair. Not only that, but she had also, unfortunately, lost control of her bladder. The floor was just soaked. It must have been a solid liter or 2. I had no idea what to do in the moment. This had never happened before. I just tried to stay calm and professional, but the apprentice sort of froze and let out a nervous laugh before panicking a bit. Luckily, the client came to and was extremely apologetic. She ended up leaving with only the outline done. We never saw her again. Honestly, it was a shame. It had the potential to be a great piece. Then there was this other time. Early on in my career, back when I was still an apprentice myself, I had just finished a half-sleeve tribal piece that I was really proud of. A few days later, the guy comes back and looking like he dipped his arm in boiling water. The tattoo was swollen, red, and starting to look septic. I was panicking, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Was it the needle, the ink, the hygiene? After a bit of back and forth, he casually says he's heading to the shop afterward to pick up more cream and tin foil. That's when I stopped him. Wait, tin foil? He goes, yeah man, you said wrap it in tin foil, right? I had to break it to him that I'd actually said cling film, not tin foil. He'd been wrapping his fresh tattoo in tin foil, like leftovers, and basically slow cooking his arm every night. No wonder it looked like that. He turned bright red and apologized a bunch. Once we got that sorted and treated properly, things healed okay, but I still laugh and cringe thinking about it. And finally, this one happened more recently and hit on a whole different level. A guy came in to get a rose tattoo with his wife's name through it. Roses are kind of my specialty, so I was feeling good about it. The design was large, a 4 or 5 inch rose with a name running across it, nice and bold. He seemed excited, but partway through he started getting quieter, distracted by texts on his phone. Eventually he asked for a smoke break, saying he just needed a minute. He was gone for about 20 minutes. When he came back, I picked up where I'd left off, getting into the shading. That's when he quietly says, I don't know what to do, man. She just told me she's been cheating on me and it's over. It felt like the air got sucked out of the room. But I finished the tattoo, kept the conversation light, and made sure he was okay. We chatted a bit after he paid, and that was that. I've never seen him again. Story 10. Not a tattoo artist, but the one getting a tattoo. So I met these Scottish guys in Amsterdam about a year ago. One of them was a tattoo artist. They're pretty cool, so when they're on an Interrail trip through Europe this summer, I suggest they come visit me and my friend in our city. They're up for it, and I've been thinking about getting another tattoo for a while, so 3 days and loads of weed later, I find myself in my friend's living room about to get tattooed on my ankle. The guy is an expert when it comes to tattooing with limited resources, or in places other than a tattoo studio. He regularly travels to conventions in India and Thailand, so he's got a travel tattoo kit. Everything was sanitized and clean. So I've decided to go with a quote from Pink Floyd, "Shine on you crazy diamond," and a diamond next to it. He draws the tattoo, puts the stencil on me, and all of a sudden his friend goes, "You better be careful," and do a double spell check. He's dyslexic. I laugh, thinking he's joking, but all of a sudden I remember the artist's status updates on Facebook and me wondering why there were so many spelling mistakes and grammatical errors. He looks up at me, dead serious, and says, "Nah, he's not joking. I am super dyslexic." Well, crap, I thought, and aside from being dyslexic, he's also high as a kite. Thankfully, all 3 of us checked it multiple times because I was super paranoid, obviously, and he even ran the words through some kind of app to let him know it's all spelled correctly. The tattoo ended up looking great. I love it, and will probably get another one done by him. I'll never forget the cold sweat and panic that rushed over me when I realized I was about to get a quote tattoo by a high dyslexic artist. Story 11. Not a tattoo artist myself, but my best friend did tattoos part-time back in the early 2000s. A mutual friend of ours wanted to get a commemorative tattoo for 9 elements, something meaningful and bold. He decided to go with the phrases, "never forget" and "never forgive," one on each forearm, written in this dramatic Old English-style script that covered nearly the entire forearms. My friend prepped the stencils in advance, double-checked placement, and started working. The client was sitting calmly while my buddy worked away. Toward the end of the session, someone else in the room glanced at the finished tattoos and said, kind of casually, "Hey, do they both say 'never forgive'?" We all looked. At first, the Old English font made it hard to tell, but after a few more seconds of silent inspection and awkward squinting, we realized that both arms actually said "never forgive." He had used separate stencils for each phrase. Somehow, even with all the prep, No one caught the mistake until the ink was already in the skin. Not the artist, not the client, not anyone else in the room. And the guy getting the tattoo was paralyzed from the waist down due to a previous car accident. He was in a wheelchair and generally not someone you'd want to upset. So when he realized what happened, let's just say there was a very long, very tense silence in the room. I honestly thought my friend was going to get wrecked. I couldn't help it. I started laughing, probably shouldn't have, but I couldn't hold it in. In the end, they were able to come up with a semi-decent fix for one of the arms, though the original intent of the tattoo was lost. Story 12. Not a tattoo artist myself, but I once knew a guy who thought he was one. He was the kind of person who bought a cheap tattoo kit off Amazon, complete with one of those little how-to booklets, and immediately declared himself open for business. He charged like $20 a piece and proudly posted photos of his work online every week. He even tried to recruit me as a client, messaging me regularly with pictures of his latest tattoos and asking what I wanted done next. To be honest, I thought his work was awful, and I'm not trying to be mean, but the lines were crooked, the proportions were way off, and the overall quality just wasn't there. But the one tattoo that stands out the most was this Grim Reaper he did for someone. He proudly sent me a picture. The Reaper's scythe, which should be sleek and intimidating, looked more like a half-circle someone free-handed during a bumpy car ride. It was crooked, and the entire thing was filled in with solid black, with no shading, depth, or definition. It looked like a child's Halloween drawing in permanent ink. When I told him that it looked rough and probably wasn't his best work, he had a list of excuses at the ready. One time, he blamed it on being high while tattooing, saying it gave him jitters. Another time, he claimed the client had drawn the original sketch, so he was just following instructions. But even if that were true, it doesn't explain why the lines were all over the place. Following a bad sketch doesn't mean you have to tattoo it exactly as is, especially if it looks like something from a middle school notebook. To this day, I still see his stuff pop up now and then, and he's still super proud of it. I just hope the people he's tattooing eventually realize you can skimp on quality when it comes to something that's going to be on your body forever. Story 13. Not a tattoo artist myself, but this one's about my best friend's uncle. So his uncle was a classic one-upper, always bragging, constantly trying to prove he was smarter, tougher, richer, whatever the situation called for. He talked down to everyone at family gatherings, correcting people unnecessarily, and tossing around unsolicited advice like he was some kind of life guru, the kind of energy that makes you wonder how his name isn't Chad. Anyway, this guy decides he's going to get some bold tattoos to show off his spiritual side. He goes in and asks for the word sacred to be tattooed across his chest and on both of his arms. Big, bold lettering, something to make a statement. Fast forward to the next day. He shows up at a family get-together, ready to reveal his new ink to everyone. He takes off his shirt dramatically, and then comes an explosion of laughter. Because right there, in massive letters across his chest, was the word scared, not sacred. Scared. Same on both arms. He was confused at first, like, why is everyone laughing? And that's when someone pointed out the spelling. The artist had shown him the stencil multiple times. He looked at it, approved it, even double-checked it in the mirror. He genuinely thought that was how you spelled sacred. The artist felt awful, but technically, it wasn't their fault. They showed him the design, got his approval, and confirmed before starting. The mistake was all on him, and now, every time someone in the family wants a laugh, all they have to say is, remember when he was scared instead of sacred? Story 14. It was my first tattoo, and everything was going smoothly at first. The artist was focused, the machine was buzzing, and I was just trying not to flinch too much. At one point, he turned around quickly while still holding the tattoo machine, which was still on, and the clip cord managed to get caught on my foot somehow. In a split second, the machine yanked out of his hand, flung through the air, and stabbed him in the arm with the same needle he had just been using on me. I could tell he was not thrilled, understandably so. After pulling the needle out of his arm, he immediately started asking me some very pointed questions about my medical and sexual history. Once I reassured him I was healthy, he took a deep breath, disinfected everything, and finished the tattoo like a total pro. The guy didn't have a single tattoo on his body when I walked into that shop. He was one of those rare artists who loved the craft but never got inked himself. And thanks to that accident, he now has his very first tattoo, a tiny little dot on his arm. Story 15. Not a tattoo artist, but the person getting tattooed. I had just returned from a long, soul-searching trip around the world and wanted a simple tattoo to commemorate it. I decided on a clean, minimalist outline of the world map. No countries, no names, just the outer borders of the continents. That was the one thing I was really specific about. Midway through the session, I suddenly heard the artist mumble a quiet, "Oh crap," under their breath. I asked what happened, and it turns out they had just started detailing China's borders, a full-on country outline. I reminded them I only wanted the general world outline, but by that point, it was already too late to undo it without leaving an awkward gap in the tattoo. So, I just rolled with it. Here's the funny part, though. A few weeks later, I met a woman from China. We hit it off almost instantly. And fast forward to today, she's my wife and the mother of our child. The tattoo artist must have known all along. Story 16. I'm not a tattoo artist, but I had my own "oh crap" moment after getting a tattoo. I got a piece on my thigh, a hand holding a flower. When I got home that night, I was admiring it, and then suddenly noticed something weird about the hand. So I started counting the fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, wait, 6? Yup, there were 6 fingers. The way the hand was positioned made it hard to tell right away, so neither I nor the artist caught it while in the shop. It was pretty shocking because this tattoo was done by a highly respected, well-known artist at one of the top shops in New York City. Not what you'd expect. Thankfully, the artist was cool about it and came back to fix it by cleverly turning the extra finger into a leaf, so it ended up looking intentional and pretty unique. Story 17. I've been tattooing for a while, and on Friday the 13th we do a $20 tattoo special. For anyone wondering, Friday the 13th $20 tattoo specials are pretty common in tattoo shops across the US. I'd been working non-stop for about 12 hours when this girl came in, wanting a tattoo of Finn from Adventure Time, along with the word 13. I used a stencil to get the lettering just right, but as I was tattooing, I noticed the stencil on her skin started to rub off a bit, probably because the tattoo was under her breast and she was a little sweaty. I should have stopped and remarked the design before continuing. A rookie mistake. So instead of stopping and re-stenciling, I kept going. Since I was still relatively new to tattooing, this was a big learning moment for me. Then mid-tattoo, I looked down and realized I had misspelled 13. Instead of the correct spelling, it came out as "third." At that moment I blurted out loud, "Oh crap." I immediately told her what happened, and thankfully she was super understanding. We decided to cover the mistake with a cluster of roses, and honestly the final piece turned out pretty great. She still comes back to get more tattoos from me several times since then. I still can't believe I misspelled 13 on Friday the 13th after tattooing it all day on people. Next Friday the 13th special is coming up soon, and honestly, I'm already dreading it. Story 18. I've been tattooing for over a dozen years, and I've had my share of wild moments, but one stands out. So this day, a very modest older lady, late 70s, maybe early 80s, and her granddaughter, who looked to be in her early 30s, walk in. The older lady was surprisingly lively and had this very proper, almost old-school Cape Cod vibe, classy and reserved. The granddaughter, on the other hand, had visible tattoos and looked like your typical tattoo client, so I naturally assumed she was the one getting inked. But nope, they both politely directed me to the older lady. I was caught off guard and kind of chuckled to myself, figuring this would be some small, delicate piece. After a few questions, she calmly says, "For starters, I would like the tattoo on my bum." I glanced at the granddaughter, who gave me a big smile and a go-for-it kind of nod without embarrassment. The older lady was totally unbothered. I was sweating but trying to keep it professional. Then I asked what she wanted on her bum. I'm a 30-year-old tattoo artist, covered head to toe in tattoos, but I found myself saying bum instead of butt or ass because it just seemed more polite in the moment. I laughed to myself quietly. Then she says, "I want to be very clear here, dear. I want this tattoo around my a-hole," totally unfazed. At this point, I sipped them, laughing out loud, thinking, is this for real? Is someone pranking me? I grabbed my drink, took a breath, and looked her straight in the eye, asking a few times if she was serious. She was rigid. At my age, I should be able to get whatever I want, tattooed wherever I want, without people questioning my sanity. Then she removes her jacket, and holy crap, this lady was covered in tattoos, decades of ink from head to toe, except for her hands and above her neck. It was like looking at a carbon copy of my grandmother, except she's asking me to tattoo her asshole. That's the moment I both loved and hated my job at the same time. Finally, I asked, "So, mishap, what exactly do you want tattooed around your hole?" She actually wanted a finger tattoo that looked like it was 2 knuckles deep in the hole, along with the words, "I do," because as she put it, I only married a holes anyway. And also, just to be clear, it wasn't my grandmother, but it honestly felt like it could have been. Story 19. Not an artist myself, but this story comes from my own experience as the one getting tattooed. So I was working on my left sleeve, and let me start by saying that if you've had large-scale work done, especially sleeves or full-body pieces, you know that some days just aren't it. You wake up and immediately feel like, I don't want to sit through this today. Your head's not in it, your body's already tired, and you're just mentally checked out before the needle even hits your skin. And unfortunately, the area we were focusing on was the inside bicep leading into the armpit, a sensitive spot for even the most seasoned ink veterans. So yeah, bad combo. About 1.5 to 2 hours into the session, that part of my arm was incredibly tender and swollen. My artist was cool and gave me breaks, even worked on a different area for a bit to give the pit a rest. But then he mentioned needing to go back in to finish that section. I wasn't mentally prepared. And when the needle hit that fresh, swollen armpit skin, my body instinctively jerked. Unfortunately, that reaction caused his machine to tear out a chunk of skin about the size of half a fingernail. It wasn't just painful, it was horrifying. Not only was I in serious discomfort, but I also felt like I just trashed the artist's hard work. I looked at him and just said, "Man, I'm sorry, but I think I'm done for the day. I can't do this right now." Thankfully, he was super chill about it, told me not to worry, and that we'd get back to it after I healed. A few weeks later, I came back, and he worked over the area again. Not only did he touch it up perfectly, but now I can't even tell where that mistake happened, and that part of my arm didn't hurt as much the second time around. I've sat through over 80 hours of ink so far, and still have more to go, and I'll say this, tattoo pain is real. Sure, some people swear it doesn't hurt, and maybe it doesn't for them. But in my experience, it's all about your pain tolerance, mental state, and even the day you show up. Story 20. Not a tattoo artist myself, but I witnessed a pretty memorable mishap. I saw a guy get a big 214 tattooed on his shoulder. The tattoo was meant to be a tribute to his grandmother, who had recently passed away. He wanted to get the exact time of her passing inked as a way to honor her. But she had actually passed at 1:42, not 2:14. So yeah, wrong time. And we're not talking about a subtle mistake either. This thing was large and front and center on his shoulder. Surprisingly, the guy took it really well. He went back and had the incorrect time crossed out like a strike-through, added the phrase, "Everybody makes mistakes," right under it, and then got the correct time tattooed on the opposite shoulder. Honestly, it ended up being kind of perfect, personal, funny, and still meaningful. The artist was still apprenticing at the time, and this was one of his first few tattoos. Because of that, he was super cautious. He showed the client the drawing, made adjustments, showed it again, applied the stencil, had the guy check it in the mirror multiple times. He even asked him to confirm the numbers again before starting. But despite all that, the mistakes still slipped through. The artist felt awful, of course, and didn't charge him a dime. The client just laughed it off and said, "Well, now I've got a story no one's gonna forget." Story 21. Not a tattoo artist myself, but something I witnessed when my friend went in for a tribute tattoo. His dog had recently passed away, and he wanted something simple and meaningful to honor him. The idea was to have the dog's name, along with the phrase "man's best friend," all placed neatly inside a bone-shaped outline. But somewhere along the way, the tattoo artist managed to mess up the lettering in the word "best." He accidentally tattooed the letter A backwards. My friend pointed it out mid-session, and the artist awkwardly tried to fix it, but the correction attempt only made it worse. It ended up looking like a smudged mess rather than a clean, heartfelt tribute. Midway through the session, the artist actually stopped and casually said, "Oh, hang on. Let me put my glasses on so I can see better," which is never something you want to hear after someone has already started permanently marking your skin. He then followed it up by sharing that he can only tattoo properly when he's a little drunk. So yeah, that was the vibe. My friend, despite all of this, kept going back to the same guy for more tattoos, multiple times. Story 22. So I said not a tattoo artist, but I was a client. I wanted to get a tattoo to honor my grandfather, something personal and meaningful, but I wanted it to be a surprise. So I thought, hey, why not get his signature tattooed? I asked him to sign his name on a piece of paper for me, but my grandpa spent his entire career as an undercover police officer. So when I asked him to sign, instead of writing his real name, he just signed some random alias or fake name he'd used. I was 18, excited to get another tattoo, and didn't think twice to double check or ask what the name was. I just handed the paper over to the artist and told them to go for it. I now have this random stranger's name permanently inked on me. Honestly, it's way better than just having my grandfather's real name because it makes for an awesome bar story every time someone asks about it. Oh, this? Yeah, it's a secret code name from my grandpa's undercover days. Story 23. I'm not a tattoo artist, but I was the recipient. I was getting a tattoo on my shoulder blade, so I was sitting upright with my back facing the artist. It wasn't a huge or complicated piece, just a simple design. Usually, for stuff on your back like that, the artist prefers to have you lying down to avoid any issues. But the shop was busy that day, so the artist told me to just sit down and they'd get it done quickly. About a third of the way through, I started feeling clammy and cold. The artist noticed and asked if I was okay. Of course, I wanted to seem tough and said, "Yeah, I'm fine," even though I was starting to feel really off. My face didn't look too pale, so the artist went back to work, starting on the next line. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I straightened up super fast, and then, just like that, I passed out cold. I tipped forward, but the artist wasn't able to catch me in time because they had the tattoo machine in one hand, and the chair was in the way. I crashed face first onto the floor. The only thing that saved me from a total disaster was the baseball cap I was wearing. I had it pulled down low and the brim took the brunt of the impact, saving my face from serious damage. Everyone in the shop saw the whole thing. Staff, clients, and people in the lobby probably heard the noise too. The artist quickly took off their gloves and set down their gear, then rolled me onto my side as I started twitching on the floor. As I started to regain consciousness, the first thing I loudly mumbled was, pancakes." Everyone then started laughing out loud. I was still pretty out of it, lying on the floor, while everyone doubled over laughing at my unexpected breakfast craving. It took a while to get me sorted out and explain what had happened, and honestly, I still have no idea why pancakes was the word my brain decided to blurt out. Story 24. Not an artist myself, but a tattoo recipient, with a pretty memorable moment that still makes me laugh. A while back, my tattoo artist and I were working on a chest piece featuring Odin's wolves, Gary and Freki, one on each pec facing outward. My artist had sharpied the wolf onto my right pec, and after a few hours of tattooing, he suddenly stops, looks back and forth between me and the sketch, and says, "I did not draw nipples on this." At first, I was a little confused, but then my girlfriend at the time started clapping and laughing uncontrollably, screaming, "He's biting your nipple," and sure enough, my artist hadn't accounted for anatomy. The wolf's mouth ended up perfectly placed as if it was biting my nipple. What makes it hilarious is that when I stretch my skin by lifting my arm, the wolf's mouth actually looks like it's opening and closing. I love the accidental animation of it. My artist and I went to the same art school and were good friends, so it wasn't like a professional disaster, more like a funny, happy accident. He's done nearly all of my tattoos, and I get plenty of compliments on the more visible ones. Honestly, I wasn't mad about the nipple-biting wolf because my sense of humor is a bit twisted, and I thought it was hilarious. For context, I also have 2 ravens and a Mjolnir tattoo from him, all done over the past 15 years. I've noticed that a lot of Viking symbols have unfortunately been co-opted by hateful groups, but mine were definitely not done with that in mind. Tattoos can be a lot like those quirky Chinese crested dogs. Maybe not for everyone, but the owners love them. I'm proud of the work my artist has done, even if it's not perfect. I've seen much better work, but also some awful tattoos, so I feel pretty lucky. Oh, and speaking of tattoos, I have to share the only time I ever tattooed someone, because it was absolutely terrifying. Years ago, through a series of bad decisions, I ended up in county jail for 17 days. In the pod, a guy was working on a drawing of a bulldog. Since I'd been drawing most of my life, I offered some tips. When he found out I'd gone to art school, he got super excited and introduced me to another guy, a big dude, who explained that the pod's regular tattoo artist had just left. Because I could draw, I was given the chance to take over tattooing duties. They even tried to give me a better bunk, which was awkward because someone was already there, and they handed me a bunch of ramen, pretty generous in jail conditions. A few days later, they rigged up a tattoo station by blocking off bunks with sheets. The tools were DIY. A staple sharpened with an emery board fitted into a plastic pen for a makeshift machine. Ink was made by melting a chess piece and mixing the soot with deodorant. We stenciled an outline of a state and put it on the big guy's arm. I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. The whole time I was thinking, please don't punch me, please don't punch me. The poor guy was obviously in pain as I basically stabbed him repeatedly. When I finally finished, the tattoo was a mess. Utter garbage. But the guy was cool about it. He could tell I was out of my depth and just appreciated that I tried. After that, I stuck to drawing for the others, which I was way better at. And yes, I'm still pretty white, though I'm heavier now than back then. Story 25. Not a tattoo artist, but a recipient. I decided to get a second tattoo kind of on a whim. Nothing fancy, just a silhouette of a Western hemlock Douglas fir, like the one on Oregon's license plate. Clean, simple, and meaningful. I walked into a local shop I hadn't been to before, and the artist seemed chill enough. He printed out a stencil, slapped it on my arm, and got to work. Right away, something felt off. He was pressing really hard, like noticeably more than during my first tattoo, and there was a lot more blood. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just because this one involved more filling, or maybe a different technique. I didn't want to be that person who questions the artist mid-session, so I stayed quiet. About halfway through, another guy walks in absolutely reeking of weed and says something like, "Yo man, I'm heading out soon. How much longer you got?" The artist goes, "Just a couple more minutes. Won't be long." Then, like flipping a switch, he starts going faster and pressing even harder. That was the exact moment I thought, okay, this is not normal. 10 minutes go by and the weed guy comes back again, clearly in a rush. "Hey dude, I really gotta go. You almost done?" And that's when the artist basically goes into overdrive, speeding through the rest like he was trying to beat a clock. By the time it was over, my arm was sore, swollen, and honestly kind of butchered. The tree that was supposed to have clean, sharp branches looked like a bunch of round blobs. The lines were heavy, the shading was rough, and I was left with a bit of scarring. Yes, he didn't get a tip. Meanwhile, his kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was in the back room blasting mind-numbing music like he was DJing a rave. Another even younger child kept running out into the shop, getting chased around by what I assume was the artist's partner or sister. So yeah, the whole thing felt less like a professional tattoo session and more like I stumbled into a very loud, chaotic daycare with a tattoo gun. Now, even if I'm getting something simple, I do my research before picking a shop. And if something feels wrong during the session, we need to speak up, seriously. Story 26. I've been a tattoo artist for about 8 years now, with a focus on watercolor style work. Over the years, I've learned that most people who come to me are looking for something deeply personal, something meaningful. Because of that, I take the process pretty seriously. I never tattoo anyone after just one meeting, unless it's a rare exception. I like to have a full consultation first, get to know them a bit, then I send over a sketch so they can approve the design or suggest edits, usually small things like adjusting color combinations. I've always believed that building a connection with the client helps make the final piece something they'll really love. Of course, that process shifts a little when it's someone I know personally. I've had a few friends come in over the years. In some ways, those are less stressful because I already know them, but in other ways, they're more stressful because I care more deeply about getting it just right. This particular story is about my friend Sumer. He was finally ready for his first tattoo but had no clue what he wanted. We went back and forth for a while trying to land on an idea. Eventually, he asked for my input. He said he felt like something was missing in his life, and he wanted the tattoo to represent that feeling. That's not uncommon. One of my favorite tattoos ever was for someone who had grown up near the ocean but moved inland as a kid. She wanted something to always remember the sea by. Another client wanted a small bird perched on the Cheshire Cat, an inside joke between him and his late fiancée. So I'm used to helping clients find meaning in their pieces. A few days later, I had an idea I thought Sumer would like. I sketched it out and sent it to him. He loved it. The only problem was that I was booked out for a couple of months. Still, I figured I could squeeze him in on a day that wasn't too busy. It was a bad call. That day ended up being much longer and more exhausting than expected. One of my clients earlier that afternoon ended up taking way longer than she was supposed to. The entire appointment was draining, and Sumer had been stuck waiting up front for nearly an hour by the time I was done. I hate making people wait, especially friends, and instead of pushing the session, I decided to power through. Not my best decision. I wasn't in the right headspace when I finally brought him back, but I still wanted to give him something special, something meaningful, so when I finished, I cleaned everything up, handed him the mirror with a smile and said, Sumer, Tua, I present to you your first tattoo, the thing you realized had been missing from your life. He looked confused. Then he looked closer. Then he laughed so hard he nearly dropped the mirror. I had tattooed the words serious on him, like literally, the Reddit tag. I had named the design file with that tag because it was meant to be a deeply personal concept. I guess somewhere between juggling clients and rushing through a chaotic day, I had tattooed the label instead of the meaning. We fixed it, of course, and he still brings it up every time we hang out. Remember when you decided my soul was missing a subreddit flair? He jokes. Story 27. Not a tattoo artist, but I've got a story. This happened last June at my boss' birthday party. She hosted it at her house, and since she's friends with a shop girl from a pretty well-known tattoo place in the city, the party took a fun twist. A few of the shop's artists showed up, and before long someone suggested doing stick and pokes for whoever wanted one. The vibe was super casual, kind of artsy, definitely chaotic. Now, I already have tattoos, but I'd never had a stick and poke before. My boss asked if I wanted one, and since her friend, the one doing them, seemed confident, I figured, why not? She even had this wild-looking stick and poke tool, custom-made by one of the shop's actual artists. It was like a tattoo machine without the motor. Weighted, well-made, and honestly looked legit. Before she got to me, though, my former boss, who used to run the cheese department and is this 36-year-old guy who has zero tattoos, decided he wanted in. This dude had been nursing a bottle of vodka all night, drinking straight from it like it was a hydration strategy, and suddenly he's volunteering to go first. We were all a little stunned because this was the same guy who used to say he'd never get a tattoo. He asked me to design a small heart, so I did a simple one, and the girl tattooed it on him. Then it was my turn. The tattoo artist friend had designed mine. It was the number 17, and while she did a decent job, she accidentally made the top of the one too long. Not a huge deal to me. I was more amused than anything, but she did keep telling me that she could only tattoo when she's drunk and high, which you know is reassuring. Fast forward about an hour and a half, and my ex-boss decides he wants to add to his heart tattoo, turning it into I heart cheese, with pictures of a heart and a cheese, not the letters, by the way. He was totally serious about it. I kept sketching little cheese wedge designs on paper until he finally approved one. He was oddly specific about the number and placement of the holes, like it were a fine art piece. Meanwhile, the girl doing the tattoos was now deep into the edibles and visibly more intoxicated. But she did her best, and honestly, for her condition, it turned out surprisingly okay. She missed a few of the main holes he wanted, but it still clearly said what it was supposed to. The image that's burned in my brain is from later that night, walking out and seeing my ex-boss lying flat on some patio furniture, still holding the vodka bottle, blanket draped over his face like he was trying to escape from reality. I remember thinking, yep, he definitely regrets it. But weirdly enough, he didn't. The next time we talked, he said he was totally fine with it. A little disappointed no one told him you shouldn't soak a fresh tattoo for 2 months, but otherwise, no regrets. He still has I heart cheese proudly inked on his leg. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.